all the colleagues online, and welcome to this event here at the SDG Pavilion. So this event is by United Nations University Institute for Natural Resources, UNU-INRA, in collaboration with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. And it is focused on the informal sector and also the JUSTIS program, the ecosystem between that in the just energy transition. How do we drive innovation and accelerate the energy transition? So we're going to start the event with an introduction and framing by Dr. Fatima Denton, who is the director of the United Nations University Institute for Natural Resources in Accra, Ghana, Dr. Denton. And then we're going to be joined by a panelist, Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, who is the Director of Technology, Climate Change, and Natural Resources at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. We're also going to be joined online by Dr. Vanessa Ushie from who is the Director of the Natural Resources Center of the African Development Bank. We're also going to have online Mr. James Nyope, who is the Economic Advisor to the President of Namibia and the lead on the Green Hydrogen program there, and Mactar Seck, who is the Chief of Technology and Innovation at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. So we start with you, Dr. Denton, to give us a perspective of why we are here today, why is this very important, and how UNU is University INRA is taking this issue of the just transition and the need for inclusion and the ecosystems with technology and innovation going forward.
Thank you very much, Linus, and welcome to all of you, and thank you for coming, and colleagues online as well. Welcome, extended welcome to you. So how it all started, I think we have been sort of thinking about just transitions for a while. And obviously there are several dimensions of the transition. We tend to focus on energy as the pathway that would deliver on just transition, but it's one avenue because there are so many other sectors that have implications for just transition. Land is an important sector and has implications for just transition. But I think we have felt for a long time that the debate on just transition hasn't been sufficiently, not a word I like, but hasn't been sufficiently indigenized. We had a feeling that it's been framed in a rather incongruous way, where those that are really bearing the brunt of the negative externalities of climate change and not the ones that are directing the transition. They're not the ones that are thinking about the design of the transition, and they don't have the capacity and I would say the infrastructure that would determine, how the transition can be shaped. And we have also seen that there have been so many power dynamics and power asymmetries related to the transition, that the transition's been talked about mainly from a jobs perspective. And we realize that it's more than just jobs. There are, as we've tended to say, that there are aspects related to society. There are aspects related to economy. And I would say, there are macroeconomic bigger aspects as well. But one of the biggest, I'd say, aha moments that we had was that if indeed Africa has a huge role to play in the transition process, then we need to begin to see an all of society and all of economy approach. And the informal sector, we had a sense that has been very much peripheralized for a long time. And, in spite of the paradox that this is a sector that is a big sort of employer, but at the same time, the informal sector is always sort of in its own marginal way, doing its own thing. And we had a sense that for the transition to happen, the informal sector has to have a key role in that shaping of the transition. There is a lot of discussion around one word that you hear often, the acceleration of the transition. And I think initially we were pushing back at the word acceleration, because the sense that we had from where we sat was that acceleration cannot happen at the expense of development. But then we're also realizing that the acceleration has to happen for a certain group of communities. The acceleration has to happen for, I would say, people who are at the front line or in the front line of energy poverty, who are at the lowest rung of the energy ladder, especially women. So acceleration process has to happen for them. So that it means that others have to accelerate to allow those people to be able to get up to the energy ladder and to move up in that way. But the acceleration has to happen also for the informal sector, because the informal sector could, as we believe, could have a leadership role to play, and that leadership role is in the sense that they could test, they could direct, as I said before, but beyond just the purveyor of jobs, they could also be entrepreneurs of the green services, the green infrastructure, the designs that we would want to see in terms of how we could shape and direct things. And so that's why we felt that bringing the informal sector into this would be very important. But we thought also we will take it, and I'll say this and finish, we thought we could take it in another dimension, that if the informal sector came on board and they stayed with all the structural difficulties that they had, problems related to markets, problems related to data paucity, problems related to not having the relevant tools, then in a way it's like the old problems would be quite pervasive. So what we felt could really be a transformational leap was if we had some kind of a market, some kind of a hub in the form of a digital platform, because digitalization, whether we like it or not, is happening, could be a way of democratizing this whole green services and green infrastructure. Because it means that we are allowing for the sharing of information, the sharing of intelligence, matters related to standardization of what do you do? What's the first thing you do if you want to market your product? And in a nice way, we felt that this could also help in terms of the policy that we would want to see, policy choices, policy designs, in ways that policy members could actually, policymakers could draw from the informal sector and could begin to shape and direct the sense of green businesses that we want to see. But it has to come from that almost fusion, explosion of ideas in the marketplace format that allows for informal sector entrepreneurs in different countries to link up, to be able to share their experiences, but to be able to explore avenues of green businesses. And so that's how the idea came together. And we've been very fortunate to have ECA partner with us, because I think we felt that ECA would understand the need for this to go beyond just a national level. Because if this grows, then it has to grow at the continental level. The infrastructure element, the digitalization element, the trade element, these are all issues that ECA is intimately aware of and intimately concerned with. And we felt that ECA could help us, ventilate some of these strategies to member states. And you are much closer to the policy organs. And with that closeness and that proximity, you could then take it further. And also with the digital, the new digital responsibility that you have and work that you're doing, we felt it could actually help us to open further doors. So in a nutshell, this is how we started, and this is why we're doing this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Denton, for giving us that wonderful framing and for reminding us that we should be talking about just transitions, not a just transition. And that when you mentioned that, it actually reminded me again of the point I've always been making, that when you look at the Paris Agreement, the just transition is just a phrase. in the preamble. It is not even an article of the agreement, but it is what has dominated the discussion. So this is a very strong point about what it is that, or how we should be addressing it, because if something that is only in the preamble has become the main contention or the main focus on driving the Paris Agreement, then it becomes even more important now to say that maybe the constituencies that were supposed to be involved were not really involved. Because you mentioned about the informal sector, how were they involved in the design? How is a whole of a society approach being taken on the just transitions and so on? So I think this is a really good opportunity. But then, as we say, not seeing it as from the problem side, but also from the opportunities. If we understand, when we understand how the just transitions could be inclusive and how people could be empowered with tools, and then we see a bigger, wonderful opportunity going forward. But since we're talking about the just transitions, but as you rightly said, one of the main focus areas of the transition is the energy transition. So Mr. Jean-Paul Adam, you are the Director of Technology, Climate Change, and Natural Resources Management at the Economic Commission for Africa. Natural resources, energy, and climate change fall under your division. And the contentious issue that has been going on and is still going on is what role oil and gas could play in accelerating Africa's transition to clean energy, given that the continent has got abundant renewable energy resources and so on. So what is your view about how the transition, but focusing on the transition for the energy sector should happen, and the critical issue about oil and gas in Africa?
Thanks a lot, Linus, and good evening to everyone. Fatima, it's always a pleasure for us to be side by side and working together closely on issues of such importance. The first point that I would emphasize is, as Fatima said, there is not one transition, there is not one pathway. We have multiple pathways, there are multiple ways in which a just transition can be implemented. But I would say, particularly in the African context, the transition cannot be divorced from the economic transformation that is required. And I believe the United Nations University publication was about great transformations. And that is the crux of the transition in an African context. We are not simply moving from one state to another. We are fundamentally altering the framing of the economy and the economic relations of our countries. And that transformation has huge implications for the informal sector. And in particular, the energy sector is essentially what will define how we can undertake the transition, because the changes that are made in terms of energy access will then define the degrees to which we can develop value chains across the continent. And it all starts with energy. Without energy, we cannot move towards more value addition, which is the goal of Agenda 2063. It's the goal of the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, is to create these value chains that connect citizens across countries and allow them to invest themselves in sustainable livelihoods, which support themselves and their families, and which also then allow us to move beyond informality. So the informal sector, I think in many cases in Africa, we have seen it as not necessarily a problem. A lot of the innovation has been driven within this informal sector. But the pandemic has also shown us how informality doesn't always breed resilience. And one of the key elements of the just energy transition is that resilience factor. The role of oil and gas resources in particular are based on the fact that the existing access to energy in Africa is extremely low, particularly compared to the rest of the world, with over 600 million people who still do not have access to electricity, 900 million people who do not have access to clean cooking, and 24 out of 54 countries where less than 50% of the population have reliable access to electricity. So when we look at those figures, we have to be investing very dramatically in the upscaling of access to energy. And in that scenario, it will involve all forms of energy, renewables will, certainly I think from the data that we've seen, renewables will play a major part and even the most important part because the cost of renewables are falling. But the challenges in the African context are that renewables upfront costs are high. So they become much cheaper as you have a stronger energy base, and then they become easier to bring on board. And the other aspects, in particular about the transition that leads to economic transformation, is the ability to provide reliable energy and then also distribute it efficiently throughout a system. And one of the problems for African countries is that we don't have the luxury of building the infrastructure and then providing access. We have to do everything at once. We have to provide access and build the infrastructure at the same time, while also then bringing online the maximum number of renewables. And in particularly when we look at gas energy provides one of the most stable and reliable forms of energy that can then allow the upscaling of renewable energies, of renewable energy across Africa. One of the challenges, of course, is how does this fit in with the goal towards 1.5 degrees and net zero? And we should emphasize that the United Nations Secretary General has emphasized again this point of multiple pathways. And every country will need to define its own just energy transition pathway. And I certainly think in the African context, we should talk about just energy transformation pathways. And in those pathways, countries should be able to use the resources that are at their disposal to accelerate as quickly as possible issues of access. And by dealing with those issues of access, we will actually create the framework which will improve the scenario to bring on board cheaper renewables and then create that opportunity in the longer term. And the last point that I will make around this is the critical aspect of linking those investments with the development of value chains across the continent. So it's not enough to just say we will invest in solar. It's to say we will invest in solar generation, we will invest in the battery precursors, we will invest in the manufacturing, and we will link the different parts of the value chain from the extraction of the rare earth minerals that can be used in batteries to the production of solar photovoltaic panels, to their deployment as well in energy generation across the continent. And if we do that, then we have the elements for ensuring that the informal sector are properly situated within the energy sector. And this is where the role of digital platforms in particular will play a role, where we want to create, through this Justice digital platform, the opportunity for entrepreneurs on the continent to have better linkages amongst themselves, with policymakers, with sources of finance, and precisely to invest in these value chains, which will create the just transformation. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. And for the colleagues online, I hope you can hear us properly. So I don't know if, yeah. So Jean-Paul, you made a lot of important points there. You talked about the issue of multiple pathways. And I think this is one of the things that has been missing in understanding the just transition, because the just transition is about a destination, and we all know what a destination is. It's a cleaner energy future. But like with any destination in life, there are multiple pathways to get there. And I think this has been quite missing in talking about, in framing and discussing about the just energy transition. Then you talk about the informal sector, and you're talking here now about people in rural Africa, for example. Now, I was born in a very rural part of Africa. I grew up in a very, bless you, rural part of Africa. But when you go to my village, now you can have maybe a bit of electricity, but when you go to most of those villages, you will find small businesses. You will find a man or a woman with a small shop running a very old generator, a very old freezer to keep things cold, but they're making a business and they're making money. And the opportunity is, how can you then make sure that these kind of communities can get better energy services, because they're having energy services, but they are not good energy services, but they have to pay a lot more than they should be paying. And their business model is still working. So you could imagine a situation where you could bring cleaner energy, renewables and so on, solar, that would improve the appliances that they use would therefore, of course, mean that they get more revenue and then better health, because we know, for example, in rural areas, we were reading with a lamp, kerosene lamp, and very smoky, or sometimes just with the wood and so on. And we know the data that with that, you're having so many people dying, up to 500,000 people dying a year because of indoor pollution. Now, but if you now go to the rural community and say you can cook, for example, with clean cook stoves, and we know that the Clean Cook Stove program has really tried to push that agenda, but in rural areas, it's not working because it is not contextualized in the circumstances of people there. So now again, it's about the issue of inclusion. How can we have now better cooking services? How can we have better energy services for the rural communities that improve not only the quality of life, but also their income generation? So in that sense, then, Dr. Denton, what would you say constitutes a compelling, just transition narrative for Africa?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think a compelling just transition for Africa, to me, has to start with the way we define security, and especially the way we define energy security. Because I think that, as you said, the transition has to be talked about in a plural manner. You can't just talk about transitions in a singular way. But I also feel that we have to make sure that the transition aligns with energy security, that it aligns with energy efficiency, that, you know, at the heart of it all is the security of people, you know, for welfare reasons, for economic livelihoods, I would say, and, you know, just to ensure that some people are not left on the margins through reasons that, you know, I mean, things that they haven't contributed to. So I think what is at stake now is the fact that the equity issues, if they're not properly addressed, and they're not properly factored into the transition process. I mean, in the IPCC process, we talked about several elements that could that I would say can be linked to a transition process. We talk about the scope of the transition. We talk about the depth of the transition. We talk about the fact also that the transition really has to be very purposeful, because if you don't know exactly where you're headed, you could be headed in the wrong direction. So you have to be very deliberate about where you're headed. So matters of scale, matters of orientation, there are matters of power. In Africa, I think one of the problems that we're seeing is that very few of our organizations are putting forward a compelling narrative on where the transition needs to be. You know, what's the inflection point? These debate has been had elsewhere. The debate has been fashioned, it's been engineered elsewhere in terms of the transition. I mean, Jean-Paul is putting a lot of emphasis on energy, and I understand that. But who makes that decision? You know, some people would also say, well, why not start from an agricultural perspective? You know, that is seen as the gateway for, you know, better livelihoods, for ensuring that Africa can feed itself and feed the rest of the world. You know, there are several multidimensional aspects of the transition. But I think that what we need to see, what would be compelling, is that we start from a departure point that we understand. I think that would be compelling. If we start from a departure point that we understand, based on our own realities, contextual realities, you know, systemic realities, system-based realities, I think then that gives us a sense of direction of travel. But when I think the transition is being more or less foisted, even if the reality is true for us that we do have an energy deficit problem, but I think we have to be able to say, how does it matter from the perspective of Senegal, the perspective of Ethiopia? You know, what would it take for these countries to really manage the exit, and to really manage an exit in a way that they would take a whole of society approach? Because I think as long as we don't do that, then what we get would look almost like an imported transition, a transition that has been fashioned elsewhere, that has some flavors of what we would like, but doesn't start from the reality of where we are, you know. So that's my sense. My sense is that indigenizing the transition, starting from our departure point, our own knowledge of issues around poverty, our own knowledge of issues around, and it could be energy poverty, but it could be other aspects that we could look at as well to see how these could be knitted together in a direction of travel that enables us to say, yes, in 4 to 5 years, this is what we want. Because as I said, if we don't do that for ourselves, then the timing of the transition, the capacity of what we want, and how we can transit, the quality of the transition in terms of how we can manage that transition, the scope of the transition, should it be more energy? Should it be more transport? Should it be more agriculture? Those things are going to be decided for us. Should it be cities, you know? Those things will be decided for us, you know, but we have to look at what we have and then fashion it in that sense.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Denton. So we need a compelling transition narrative where Africa sees itself in it, where Africa sees it related to its own realities and is very much involved in framing it and sees it as its own opportunities, not presented opportunities. And I think Jean-Paul talked about the minerals, the batteries, and the trade. And this area of trade is very important because it brings in inclusion. But we're trading with natural resources, either as raw or transformed natural resources. So I want to come to you, Dr. Vanessa Ushie. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful, wonderful, thank you. So you are the acting director of the African Natural Resources Center at the African Development Bank. And so you heard about this issue of how can we have an energy just transitions that reflect how we best use our natural resources, how we include people in the informal sector and empower women and young people, entrepreneurship. And Fatima talked in the framing about using a digital platform that can help to inspire and empower people, particularly women. So from your perspective, how do you see this nexus with energy, transformation of natural resources, empowerment of women, empowerment of rural communities, young people, and so on? How do you see this nexus as a way of creating jobs going forward?
Okay, so thank you so much to Dr. Denton and UNU-INRA and UN-ECA as well for inviting the African Development Bank to take part in this conversation. And I really enjoyed the opening remarks from Fatima and Jean-Paul. And the emphasis is on dignity and equity, because we cannot have a just transition if some people are excluded. And this leads to the series of points I'm going to make on women and green jobs. So last year, the AfDB and UN Women collaborated for a study looking exactly at how we can create green jobs for women in Africa. What we have found in this analysis and in our work on creating these types of green jobs as part of the just transition is that women are being underrepresented in key sectors of the green economy where they could actually benefit from green jobs, particularly at the higher end of the scale, including areas such as transportation, construction. But we see women overrepresented in the lower end of the scale on agriculture, particularly subsistence agriculture and waste management. And of course, we know that many families and communities rely on biomass for cooking and energy. So all of this shows that women are really not represented in ways that can transform their lives and that they can benefit from this green transition. But there are opportunities. For instance, if you look at forestry and tourism, these are important areas where women could be more engaged, but this is not happening. And there are some recommendations that we could apply in this area. We also see that women have a higher share of vulnerable employment, higher than men. It's about 80% compared to 67% of men's jobs classified as being vulnerable. In general, there's a high level of informality in Africa. but women are more likely to be in informal jobs than men. We have a statistic that says that in 2018, almost 90% of women were to be found in these informal jobs as compared to men. And looking at agriculture, it's often done on a subsistence basis, and women are unable to benefit from any economies of scale because of the low productivity in this type method of agriculture. And so there are very strong incentives to move into areas of agriculture where women can benefit either from economies of scale, of new production techniques, which will really enhance the ability to earn more and to also contribute more to the green economy. If you look at fisheries as well, although we have limited data, but we see that aquaculture in particular is an area where you find that women could benefit more in the green transition. And if you look at tourism, again, there are also opportunities where women could benefit, and women are actually highly represented in the tourism sector. It's really a question of empowering them and giving them more support. So the two key things that emerge is how do we address informality and how do we finance women-owned businesses, particularly SMEs, because this would drive the growth of entrepreneurship and create more green jobs. And looking at the circular economy, we may see opportunities there for women in issues such as recycling and waste management. And some case studies from African countries show that improving waste to energy technology actually creates more employment opportunities for women. So we can take a gendered lens to the circular economy, and this would really help in creating more inclusion. But as I said, it's really about the quality of jobs we're creating for women and not necessarily the quantity. So we see formalization as an entry point towards job creation, and we can identify priority sectors where women could be supported either through training, skills development, and through financing in order for them to benefit for these new jobs, green jobs. And it's also important to recognize that women perform a lot of unpaid work, which is not necessarily recognized or given a fair economic value. But with the just transition and looking at areas and instruments, including carbon credits and payments for ecosystem and environmental services in sectors such as tourism and forestry, we could try to now better appreciate the economic contributions that women are making to sustainably manage their natural resources. So the AfDB has several innovative financing instruments, which some of you may be aware of. We have the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa called AFAWA, and other mechanisms on fertilizer financing, and through our sector initiatives on the Africa Water Facility, and some climate funds that we have been able to use to generate new programs that support women. And then in terms of our policy frameworks, our climate change and green growth policy, we have a policy on jobs for youth and entrepreneurship, and we're now developing a new strategy on natural resources management and investment. All of these policy frameworks recognize the important role for women in driving the green growth transition by creating decent jobs and how we can address the barriers to women's economic empowerment and investing in women more comprehensively. So some policy actions that we could take now, we could look at reskilling and upskilling programs which target women. Also developing women's networks in male-dominated sectors of the green economy, and how we can support women entrepreneurs and women businesses in transitioning from informality towards a more formal economy, and recognizing the importance of having a level playing field for gender-responsive policies by removing legal barriers and addressing discrimination in legislation, for instance. And above all, how we can have green economic policy instruments. So looking at public finance, for instance, and how this can support women's employment and a more inclusive economy. So I agree, and I reemphasize the very salient points made by previous speakers that a just transition should be equitable, it should be inclusive, it should leave no one behind. This would require a redistribution of income. It will require women to be given more opportunities and more carefully designed policies that can really unleash the innate economic potential in women, but also to empower them to contribute more centrally to driving this green transition. So we recognize this very strongly in the AfDB, and we're ready to work with our partners towards really empowering women to benefit and to participate in the green transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ushie, for those great insights, and also for highlighting the point that the AfDB has opportunities to provide financing for women in the transition agenda. Of course, we talked about what will happen when you give more access to energy to women, especially the job creation that comes with that, the liberation that comes with that. In fact, talking about the liberation that comes with that, we had an event some years back at what they call the Vienna Energy Forum. I was involved in writing the key messages to read in the main session. And one of the key messages was that energy access, particularly for rural communities, is freedom. And so when Dr. Michaela was reading these messages, somebody became very angry and said, why do you always have to politicize everything? Why are you talking about freedom and energy and so on? And he listened very quietly, and then he said, look, my friend, I went to see my mother, my auntie, a few weeks ago in the village. She had to go to bed at 9 p.m. because there was no light. If there was light, she would have been free to stay up for as long as she liked. If there was light, she would have been able to do it. That is freedom you're talking about. So I think this dimension of freedom that comes with the empowerment that you get from going from an informal, vulnerable situation to where you feel more free, more empowered is extremely important, and it will be essential for you to also let us know how can women access some of this financing so that they can be free. They can be free to formalize the informality and become more empowered and then less vulnerable. So it will also be good if you can let us know, or at least for some of the listeners who might be interested, if they want to get some financing from the AfDB to become free, to become empowered in this transition, how they will go about it.
Thank you. So very briefly, there are various ways to access financing. In some cases, there are direct grant programs in which the bank finances some SMEs or women-owned businesses. And there are some ongoing call for proposals from women-owned businesses through the AFAWA program, for instance, which I mentioned. In other cases, we have projects. We have several projects and initiatives where these are focused on women's economic empowerment, on creating green jobs, and ensuring equity in employment and transition to green growth. So we also have programs where the bank is either investing directly in businesses or offering partial guarantees to sovereign governments to really reduce the risk of their own support to women businesses. So I think there are various mechanisms through which women can really partake and benefit from this financing. I would just encourage them to reach out, particularly using our website and other digital platforms to really find out more about this. But rest assured that we understand the scale of the problem, and we're using various ways to ensure that women are being adequately supported. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ushie. In fact, some years ago, I visited the Nyeri part of Kenya, and we saw a very beautiful program that UNDP was implementing. It was called the non-grazing two-cow solution, where a family has 2 cows, but they're not grazing, and the 2 cows are fenced in a stable, and they produce, of course, poo, and it's used to produce biogas. And then the biogas is used to provide cleaner cooking for the women, and is used to also provide lighting and so on. And therefore, the women don't have to, and the children don't have to go to cut wood and so on. But till today, I don't see a lot of investments happening in that, because it makes a lot of economic sense. Because what was happening is that the biogas, the digested, was also being used as manure to grow vegetables, which they then sell and have more income. But still, where is the investment? Why are not many of such initiatives being financed? Or if you take my country, Cameroon, for example, it's about the fourth producer of cocoa. If you go to the area of Cameroon where they produce most of the cocoa, it's called Western Bakosi. It's so inaccessible. And the cocoa is being dried by burning wood. Now, when you dry your cocoa by burning wood, you cannot control the temperature very well. So the quality of your beans is not good. So it makes a case for renewable energy to be used. For example, where you can use the waste material from the cocoa to do combined heat and power, where the heat can be used to dry the cocoa but still the investments are not there. So is it an issue of why is these opportunities that can actually help in the transition, why are they not, and the formalization of the informality, why are they not, why are we not seeing more of it when it makes a lot of sense? So I don't know, Jean-Paul, whether I want to say something about that. Then I will link up to you, Mactar, to see how technology can help in this process.
Thanks. I think the examples you've given, Linus, are really extremely illustrative for the type of just transformation that we want to have, because the majority of financial instruments are designed around risk. They are not designed around the transformative impact. So they are designed around the risk of the financier and not around the actual impact of towards the end user. And this is one of the challenges in any case, which is linked to the global financial system, and it's not necessarily unique to Africa, but the sources of risks are often amplified in Africa for different reasons. In rural communities, maybe lack of land tenure, again, access to other resources and so on. So I think one of the issues is, yes, there has to be a very clear narrative and plan, which has to be done by both local governments and national governments on ensuring that the basic infrastructure that is necessary is available. And in fact, the Just Transition Plan should start about this question of access to that infrastructure. And that infrastructure is energy. Energy often then leads to other infrastructure, but it's the ensemble of all of that infrastructure needs. But we must start with that point of not necessarily what are the types of energy we're going to use or what are the resources that we need, where do we need to be? And then you build backwards to make sure that that kind of investment can happen. So then at the level of the individual family or smallholder farmer or entrepreneur, how do we get finance? Why aren't they being supported to buy cows? Why aren't they being supported to do a lot of these simple solutions? And I think one of the simple answers is that we have not packaged these interventions properly. Because for the people who have finance, it does not make sense that to finance a cow is charity. But if you have an intervention, which is at the level of the whole region, where you have a large number of cows, and this is integrated with, again, the opportunity for more value addition, for agro-processing to be happening, for these communities to be involved in economic activity, then you have an investable project, and then you can also then deal with the issues of risk around it. And I think the same applies to energy. We worry about who's going to pay for the energy, but the energy is not there. And what we've seen in the majority of countries, once the investment happens, very quickly you will have consumers, and in fact, the consumption goes up because then they start to do lots of other activities. So for me, everything starts with access, and then the design of finance is actually around that question of access.
No, thank you, Jean-Paul. That's really good. And in making this point on how we can really address the challenges and provide the solutions. But one way of providing solutions is through technology and innovation. But technology and innovation, you need energy as well. So there's a strong nexus there. So Mactar, you are in charge of the Digital Center of Excellence at the Economic Commission for Africa. How do you see the role of technology and innovation and the launch of this JUSTIS platform as an important way of addressing the just transitions in Africa, particularly with respect to the informal sector?
Thank you very much, Linus. Good evening, Jean-Paul. Good evening, Fatima. Good evening, all participants to this important session. As you know, technology, it is very important to overcome to the challenge faced for green transition. Let me start by one example. For example, to avoid an estimated of 26 billion metric ton of net CO2 from 26 to 2025. We need to avoid this estimate amount of metric ton of net CO2. And this is coming in three sectors: on electricity, logistic, and automotive. And digital technology. Now we talk about digital technology innovation and also green technology like solar power, wind power, hydropower, biomass, and biofuel to overcome to this challenge. As you know, this technology has an enormous impact in terms of boosting the economy through several aids: green technology, sustainable industry, transport, and also to cut pollution. As you know, the digital technology participate to the emission CO2 to 5%, but they can help to reduce at 15%, 15% this emission gas. And there is several ways for digital technology and innovation to help green transition in terms of creating robust digital system for renewable carbon energy, as well as to develop digital infrastructure and service to help industry to save significant part of CO2 emission. We use several technology, what call it emerging technology in the industry sector, like Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, to save this billion ton of CO2 in the industry sector. Also, in the smart transport, it is we have several examples where digital technology can help to reduce the energy consumption. For example, if you want to put the estimate as a universal access to energy, we estimate that we need 8.1 billion metric ton of CO2 emission could be saved by 2025 if we use this technology. And this create 418 billion of dollars for the new value of economy. You have seen the importance of digital technology on green transition in help to decarbonize the digital economy, as well as to provide some resource to the economy, the world economy. Also, digital technology is a user in several other applications like this weather prediction, this forecasting system, early warning system, and this digital technology can help also, as well as in the working system. Now, access to the information, the aggregation of data of climate change. All this use of digital technology help for this green transition. But we have several applications and several benefits of digital technology for green transition. But to use efficiency digital technology in the continent, digital technology innovation or green technology, we have several challenges to overcome. The one major challenge for the green transition in the continent is a lack of financing investment. I think in the several discussions, we don't talk about this issue of financing, because when we take the case of energy, it is expected that the continent will require an annual investment on $70 billion until 2013 to achieve this clean energy transition. It is a lot, and we don't have enough fund in the continent for that. We have to find a solution on this area of financing. Also, the private sector investment in this area is very limited. And less than 12% of infrastructure investment in the Africa come from the private sector, and mainly through foreign investment. When we want to use this digital technology, we need to invest to this infrastructure. And we have a lack on this in the continent. The other one, it is this climate information system. We don't have adequate climate information system in the continent. Why is digital green platform we are going to launch today with our partner, United Nations University Institute of Natural Resources. It's very important to respond to the need of the continent in terms of access information, sharing information, and also helping to the green transition. Of course, we can't talk about the issue of access. We need also people to have access because we have around 40% people access to the digital technology in the continent. We need to increase this access, to expand this broadband, as well to look at the price, because if we have the infrastructure without people that doesn't have the means to use this, it will be a big problem. Why access of affordability is very important. When we talk about the green transition, of course, we talk about this rural area. It's very important to expand this access in the rural area, as well as to overcome to the gender digital divide. You give several examples in the continent, and we need people to have equal access to the digital infrastructure to help everybody and to leave no one behind in terms on this green transition. Is why at UN-ECA, through the Digital Center of Excellence, now under TCND, Technology Division, chair led by Jean-Paul, we focus on several areas for green transition. In the policy environment, we support African countries to develop a sound policy environment to help for this green transition. In capacity building also, we have several program on capacity building. In this green transition, we have some partners like Alibaba. We develop some content on green transition, as well as we plan now to work with other universities on that. We also develop establish this artificial intelligence center in Congo, Brazzaville, to use how to use artificial intelligence in the area of environment. And we start we established this in March 2022, and the training already started this year. Also, we work to mobilize the private sector to be involved in this green transition, to invest in the infrastructure to support African country, to help the African country to make this green transition. We work with some partners like Africa 50 to support African country to expand their broadband infrastructure. Of course, when we talk about this green transition, we have to build the skill of our young generation, and we have this program called African Coding Camp, where we teach a girl on digital skill, the girl aged from 12 to 25 years on digital skill, and we give them opportunity to use the digital skill to develop several applications in climate change, on green transition also, adapted to their need and their environment. Also, we have this boot camp open to all innovators all young innovators in the continent to come up with a key solution on green transition. I'm going to summarize to stop there because there are a lot of activity we have under the digital center. I think if Jean-Paul can complete some as activity, if we have enough time. Thank you very much for that.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Mactar, for making the very important point and illustrating how digitalization can actually help with emission reduction as part of the energy transition agenda, but also emphasizing the importance of having access to digital infrastructure and digital services. But I would like to come back to you just quickly to say, in terms of this, where do you see the low-hanging fruits of how digitalization and access to digital services could help in the just transition and in the informal sector? If you take one of the areas of the informal sector is like transport, motorbike transport in some of the big cities in Africa, and they're so polluting. But you have also big spaces. Why is the issue of things like digital, what do you call it, smart meters? Why is that not something that it could, but this could be a low-hanging fruit, right? where you have in stores and markets and so on, people installing solar panels with smart meters that can be generating money for them. Why is that not happening? Or why are the why are the motorbikes in most of these cities that are so polluting? Why can they not be electric? Where do you see as the low-hanging fruit that we could tap on the digitalization access to enhance the transition?
It's a very, very pertinent question. As you know, 80% of the Africa economy is from the informal sector. How this informal sector can use digitalization to help for this green transition, and what are the challenges faced? The first challenge, it is the innovation. We have to support the innovation in the continent. Yeah, we have a young people, very smart. We have a great idea. We have to support them to make this innovation in reality. Is what we try to do for the coding camp, as well as for one activity we have at ECA called Innovation, Investment, and Industrialization Week. People come with their idea, and we promote this idea using innovation to make this reality and to link them with the private sector. Because as I'm saying, the issue is a big issue. It is a financing. Yeah, you can have an idea, but you need finance to make this idea in reality. And we need to have this linkage between innovation and private sector. It is very, very important. The other issue also, we need to put a sound regulation to permit these people, this young innovator, to use this green technology. Because the issue is we have a lot of issue on regulation in the continent, because the green technology is part of the emerging technology, and we don't have a sound regulation on emerging technology in the continent. It's like the fintech sector, reason why we are working with African Union Commission to put in place a general framework for this kind of innovation in the continent. We have also the African Digital Transformation Strategy adopted in 2020. We have a key pillar on this digital innovation, this capacity building also very, very important, and all this contributor to create a new innovator in the continent, to be a real actor in the green transition sector in the continent. Thank you.
Okay. No, wonderful. Thank you very much, Mactar. You mentioned about the role of the private sector and having this regulatory framework, especially with new technologies. One area of new technology that is the buzz on the continent at the moment and globally is the green hydrogen. And I think we have with us our speaker, James Nyope. James,
Yeah,
are you connected?
Yeah.
No, it looks like James is not connected. James, are you connected? No, James is not connected, but James is the economic advisor at the presidency of Namibia, and they're leading the green hydrogen program there, which is being seen as the what do they say, the signal that if it works, it's going to work for Africa. So it's very important. Unfortunately, James could not connect. And I know yesterday they signed a very big deal at the Namibian pavilion on this. So Mactar, so you've talked about the digital platform and why it is important, and we know why it's important. JUSTIS is exactly there to see how do we then leverage the digital platform to empower the energy transition, to empower the informal sector and bring them out to formality, particularly with respect to women and so on. So this JUSTIS program is a joint initiative, which I will now pass over to you, Dr. Denton and Jean-Paul, to talk about it and launch it.
Okay, thank you.
So let me invite my colleague, Thelma Akko, to give us a sense of what the platform does. There's one point I wanted to make, and I think Jean-Paul mentioned the word resilience, because this essentially is about resilience. We are not going to be able to bridge the transition gap if we do not look at the resource elements of the transition. And there are resource all over. There's resource in terms of financial resource, there's knowledge resource, there's infrastructure resource. But I think we have to also make space and time for reskilling and retooling. Because when we retool and when we reskill, we open up avenues for innovation, but we create new assets. By reskilling, we're creating new assets, because if you don't reskill, people would go back to the old ways of doing things. So it's absolutely fundamental that this program allows us that level of innovation where we can begin to reskill and retool in ways that allow people to grow, but grow with new skills. Thelma, if you're there, I would just like to invite you to give us a sense of where's the element of innovation, the element of potential market opportunities that the platform might be able to come up with. You've had Dr. Ushie talk about the gender disparities and what that might mean and how that could somehow impede the direction of travel if we don't do things properly and we don't bring in the equity dimension on board. So if you could just give us a sense of what are some of the statistics that you're seeing in terms of the platform itself. Sorry, I'm taking up your role, but just so that she could give us a more pointer, because this might all seem abstract, but unless we get her to talk about some of the developments and the evolution of that platform itself, we may not really get a good appreciation of what the platform can do.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Denton. So we have created this platform to serve as a marketplace, actually a regional marketplace, to connect entrepreneurs across various countries on the region. And what we are seeing with the work we started doing is that the green entrepreneurial sector, it's an emerging area, but we actually see a good participation of the informal sector in this space. But most of the major challenges they are facing is finance. They are also facing the challenge of, because there are no policies regulating these, they are facing the challenge of the products that they are actually trading and marketing not meeting the specifications that are indicated on the product. So we are opening our market to kind of some substandard products because of the lack of regulations. And most of these green innovations, there is quite a good acceptance of this innovation. We registered about 2% of the informal sector businesses that we interviewed actually adopting and using these green energies. So they are demonstrating the potential as early adopters and users of these technologies. And we also have a lot of them also participating in actually producing these technologies. And we see a lot of the production in the biomass sector. So a lot of them using it for biomass production, biochar. We have innovations also in the poultry and farming, where instead of using biomass charcoal, these green entrepreneurs in the informal sector are rather using the biochar to warm the pens, the poultry. So all these are efforts to actually reduce the impact on deforestation, on the biomass use. So I'll pause here. We are going to play the video, and then that shows how the portal works, and then how users can actually sign up and engage on the portal. Thank you very much.
Accelerating the green energy transition requires smart energy solutions, entrepreneurship, and increased investment driven by enabling policies. The Justice digital portal seeks to bridge the gap between green entrepreneurs, policymakers, and investors to accelerate green growth and green transitions. The platform creates an avenue to engage and connect green entrepreneurs across Africa with a support infrastructure, enabling businesses to thrive, grow, and effectively contribute to green transition efforts. The interactive platform allows users to explore metadata on informal sector entrepreneurs in Africa and green businesses. Users can view analytics and charts based on country or sector. The data can also be modified based on thematic areas. Explore different descriptive metrics such as the gender distribution, access to finance, availability of energy sources, use of renewables, as well as challenges faced by informal businesses. A resource library on the website provides documents and useful information related to just transitions and informality, green entrepreneurship, and country findings. Search through an inventory of green entrepreneurs to connect with businesses in the selected countries and get in touch with them. A social network on the website, Justice Social, allows users to interact with policymakers, entrepreneurs, and investors. Find out about businesses or find out about opportunities. Message users directly and share information. Green entrepreneurs can gain greater visibility, market access, and mentorship. Investors can engage with green innovators to identify new business ventures, and policymakers can gain data insight to support inclusive green energy policy decisions. This initiative is a product of a project designed by the United Nations University Institute for Natural Resources in Africa and supported by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa.
Well, I think we're coming towards the point where it's dangerous to talk for too long. But I would like to say that I think that the portal is particularly interesting as a connection point. And I think one of the interesting elements is bringing people together among entrepreneurs with potential other partners among entrepreneurs, but also as a way of creating more synergy between the policy-making environment and practitioners. And I think that's something which is often not given enough attention to in the African context. And by having this kind of portal, I think we can better connect those different groups and provide a way in which we can, and I think one of the best approaches for governments as well is to recognize the needs as expressed by users. And I think that's one of the biggest opportunities around digital technologies, that it shortens distances. It can bring people together who perhaps are not naturally finding themselves in the same room, but in the digital space, we can bring them closer together. So I think the Justice platform is really all about translating the just transformation into action by connecting people. And that's where we think there's a huge opportunity. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Thelma, very much for presenting us the Justice platform. Thank you very much, Dr. Denton and Jean-Paul for that. But and thank you to Dr. Ushie, to Mactar, who have connected online. We've heard how the just transitions are important, where energy is a thread linking all of that. There's nexus on how you empower people, particularly in the informal sector, how energy plays a very important there. Agricultural transformation, empowering women, and helping to get people out of the informal sector to the more formal sector in multiple ways that enrich them, make their productive capabilities bigger, suppress demand is addressed, and so on. All of these things, particularly when you have a platform that then gives an opportunity to bring the informal sector, investors, and the policymakers together it becomes really transformation. And then that's when we can really say we are addressing the just transition. It is inclusive, then it is just, it is designed with the people who have the solutions, and then who also are enabled with the policies and the investments. So this is a wonderful initiative, and I want to thank, yes, sorry. Oh, okay, of course, yes, Eric, please.
How do you define informal sectors? Because I can imagine that from country to countries in Africa, in South Africa, in Egypt and in Cameroon, the definition is quite different. I think that is one thing that I wanted to ask. One question have been addressed, concrete example on informal sectors in renewable energies. I think the charcoal is something that have been mentioned. But when I'm trying to think a bit more deeper, which other example, the renewable energy, a new technology which sometimes require also a level of knowledge, literacies, and informal sectors in many of our countries is also linked with the literacy level. If you are talking on installing solar panel and all these things, it means you need some skills at least to be able to do that. So beside the circular economy, so which are other examples where the informal sectors in renewable energy can play a role? And talking about literacy, so I think Mactar talked about the access in rural area, access with regard to affordability, but access with regard also to the literacy level, particularly in context of the platform. So let's take other sectors, let's say transportation, as you have mentioned. How do you bridge this literacy gap for these people in the informal sectors to interact with the platform? From the technological perspective, there are a lot of possibility, but then you have to think from the bottom up. So SSD, so with village people which have information on agricultural. So you have to think more from the perspective of the end user than the perspective of the platform. So if it's something that have been addressed, at least to make it more inclusive and accessible for these people. And maybe for Ushie, Dr. Ushie from the bank. So you mentioned also the private sector's role. How do you leverage on local resources, local finances? Because they are also, if you are thinking on, in many of our countries, people who have house to rent, land tenants, they are people who have money and which sometimes look on how to invest. So how do you bring them into that? And in the broader sense, when you are talking also on this transformation, so I saw a lot of projects that the ECA is implementing itself when it comes to the digital centers. But there are a lot of actors already in place, like the Technology and AfriLabs, the Umbrella Association of Technology Innovation Hubs, which have the experiences on organizing these hackathons, which have Technology and Innovation Hubs members in all of the African countries, which have better way of implementing because it's their daily work. So is it not the way of, is it not better to empower these actors at least to deliver more in this innovative solution in these challenges instead of implementing at the ECA itself? So the question is yet more on the collaboration with the other actors like the Tech Hub, like the venture capital for the business angel network. So all these other actors which are not the classical actors that you have in the in the mainframe, how could you integrate them to them? I think that are more or less some questions, at least that I had to raise to the panel. So.
Thank you very much, Eric, for that and reminding me about the need to ask audience for the questions. Maybe we can take a few more before we come back to you to answer. So is there any more questions from the audience in here or online before we go to our panelists? Okay, so if we can address Eric's question, I think they apply to all the speakers. The particular issue about the people that the platform wants to empower, are they empowered to use the platform that wants to empower them? If I got you, that's the question you're asking, right? And then you also ask about, maybe Mactar this for you. So this first one is for you, Fatima and JP. Then the second one, you were asking about the digital centers and the need, instead of replication, or how do you bring together what is already there and it's been proven to work. And then the examples of the informal sector, because as you say, in the energy sector, you could think about charcoal production, but what are the other energy, informal sectors that relate to the just transition that we're talking about? So maybe we'll start with you, Fatima, and then Jean-Paul, and then to you, Mactar, and then Dr. Ushie.
Let me try and answer the question about literacy, because I think we sort of came up with this as almost like a stumbling block, I'd say, when we started designing the project. There was a sense that how are you going to link entrepreneurs to a digital platform? They don't have the knowledge or the skills, you know, and also the fact is that internet penetration in Africa is growing, but it's still quite low. So that I think is an issue, and that's where the whole aspect of reskilling and retooling comes in. I really want to make an emphasis on the need for T as transformation rather than T as transition, right? Because I think that if we look at it from the perspective that some of these old problems, structural problems of literacy, this might be an opportunity to reset the dials, right? We can reboot our system by saying, how do we now provide support, use this as an opportunity for literacy skills? Because the transitional or the transformational world that we want to create will demand new skills. There will be new infrastructure that will be needed. There'll be new knowledge that will be needed. So unless you reskill and you retool, you're not going to be able to get people to give you their full potential. But I also wanted to bring Thelma on board because she has a more kind of practical sense of what are some of the findings that they're seeing in terms of literacy to be able to provide you with a more pointed answer. Thelma?
Denton. So what we found with the data was that about 40% of the informal sector have at least a primary education. So, and also we find a high level of use of digital equipment with this informal sector. So we actually designed also an application that can work on their phones and also an analog version so they can actually communicate. And we also have we will be having training sessions to actually help this informal sector to use the platform and engage with the platform. Thank you.
Yes, so perhaps on the question of engaging with informal communities on energy production. And I think it's important in the context of the multiple pathways to transitions and transformations that, I mean, not every community is going to produce their own energy. I think it's a question of the right framework for the right situation. So in some circumstances, you will have the opportunity for individual communities to produce their own energy in a sustainable way using microgrids, investing in that way, biofuels, biochar, charcoal, and so on. I think all of these are different options which can be part of a greater whole. But I think it's important that we don't necessarily just look at it from the perspective of how you empower people to use low-cost solutions which are also sustainable for energy generation. But it's also how you connect those people even to the grid, because it's how you can make individuals in isolated communities more productive. And access to energy is the step one about leading to higher productivity in rural areas. So I think there is no one, there is where the solutions are logical and where they are linked as well to opportunities for value creation. It's good to look at that energy value chain that is really situated within the community, but the focus should be connecting people to the energy system, and that will lead to increased productivity. The other aspect, I think, about channeling resources, particularly to to communities that are in rural areas and so on is the opportunity through carbon credit markets, because these are mechanisms which at scale will create vehicles that are very attractive for investment, so they will channel large amounts of financing. But if structured right, they can bring money to the individual farmer, the individual practitioner. And so I think there's a huge opportunity to be able to scale, to bring finance in that direction. And the final point, which Mactar, I'm sure will cover a bit more, on the Digital Center of Excellence. It's a center of excellence, so it's not exclusive. We work with a number of partners, and including some of the ones that you mentioned, perhaps not all, but the Center of Excellence also is responsive to requests from member states. So a lot of the work has been around, so for example, on the coding camps, it has been to meet specific needs that have been expressed by member states, right, concerning a specific group. And in many cases, we've worked with groups that are already active in those countries, depending on the country. And there should be a multiplicity of initiatives. There should be many hackathons happening. And they don't all need to be under the roof of the Digital Center of Excellence, but if they want to be, they are welcome.
No, thank you very much, Jean-Paul. We really way beyond our time. And so I don't know if there's any burning response from you, Mactar, or from Dr. Ushie before we close.
No, I don't have a lot of to add, but we already touched the issue of literacy. And I think we have to know when we design this platform, the user is the central point. It means there is no problem for the people in the rural area to use this platform. As Thelma already answered this question, we use application, and as you know, I give you an example on the financial inclusion on the mobile money. So more than 75% of the mobile account is in Africa, and the most people using this platform are coming from the rural area. We take note on your suggestion. We are at the first stage of this platform. We piloting 4 countries, and we'll see how we can improve this. Thank you very much for this suggestion. Also, I think Jean-Paul already responded to the issue of collaboration. We are open. We can work with everybody. We work at the private sector, civil society, member state, international organization, no governmental organization. You are welcome to come to work with us in several projects. We have a lot of portfolio of projects going digital ID, Internet of Things, digital transformation, e-commerce, e-trade, energy transition. We have too many activities on the digital. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mactar, thank you. Thank you so much. And finally, Dr. Ushie, about how you define the informal sector.
Defining the informal sector, you look at the type of business involved, you look at, again, if it's recognized legally, the structure, the income generated by the business. I think there are various definitions of informality, and we see that in Africa is really related to whether these companies or businesses are being taxed and are recognized by the government as taxable entities. So that would be a practical way of looking at whether they could be informal or formal enterprises. But I agree that there are various definitions of informality, and it's really critical to look at the sectoral dimension in various countries. But the point I wanted to speak to was on the private sector, how we can work with the private sector and local finance. And one of the things we're doing at the AfDB is to support the creation of what we're calling green banks and youth entrepreneurship investment banks. We want to create viable platforms and vehicles whereby the private sector can really be brought on board to finance green jobs, green investments, and green business opportunities. Some of the challenges that we've seen that this very innovative platform, JUSTIS, is trying to address: the knowledge gap, the information gap, and working at scale between various actors. So for us, really bringing the private sector through these innovative models of banking is critical, and how we can also support de-risking through our lending operations and technical assistance to countries as well, in order to encourage private sector participation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Ushie. Thank you very much, Mactar. Thank you very much, JP, and thank you very much, Fatima. It's been a wonderful discussion, and we apologize for running out of time. But thank you very much, and thank you, colleagues, for.
Can you say the platform is formally launched?
We now can very proudly say the digital platform is formally launched. Thank you very much.
Congratulations for launching this wonderful platform.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for the pavilion for hosting us. And apologies that we run out of time, but it's been wonderful. You know, yeah, we stayed because we felt so comfortable. So that means you're a very good host. Thank you so much.